thanks so much for meeting with me today.
That's okay. My pleasure. Lovely to catch up again.
So I'm with Paul from Complete Canine Solutions, dog trainer extraordinaire. Before we met, I'll be honest with you, mate, I was warned about you.
Cool.
They told me you were a fantastic dog trainer, but you don't mince words. Like, you're very direct. You tell people exactly what you think. There's no ifs and buts about where people stand with you. The lucky thing is I'm so likable.
Absolutely.
That we just got on like a house on fire straight away, I think.
You ticked all my groups with people I like, you know, so that.
So short.
Yeah. Look, I must admit, I think a lot of that is my personality in general. I don't sort of tolerate fools well. I really don't like playing to the egos and emotions as such, you know. And I guess when it comes to dogs, obviously I'm extremely passionate with dogs and love my dogs. And I just feel that there's so much misinformation out there that really compromises, you know, the health of our dog as well as their emotional wellness. And sometimes you just need to come in really hard, really direct, and be a bit brutal just to get your message across, because you're really competing with a lot of misinformation. You're competing with a lot of emotional sort of, you know, I guess it's almost propaganda where you look where a lot of the stuff's gone with dogs lately. And I sort of feel that, you know, sometimes, especially with clients and stuff, you know, it's really important to come in, be very direct, but then also be in a situation where you can justify what you're saying by calling on examples in nature and things like that to support what you're trying to get across.
How long have you been a dog trainer then, and what did you used to do before that?
Probably, well, when we start looking at dogs, I suppose it was like I grew up with dogs, always had dogs. Got involved in showing dogs at a fairly young age. Was tied up with the Rottweiler Club, which amalgamated with the Spitz Club. So the Rottweilers and Spitz clubs used to train together. Worked as a trainer with these guys. Then worked for Dogs West as the trainer there. Then started sort of assisting people with bits and pieces of their own dogs, and then eventually just get growing and growing to the point where it could be a full-time job. And that was probably, it must be 15 or 20 years ago. We've run this full-time now, Complete Canine. So, yeah.
Initially, your clients came from those dog clubs?
Yeah, originally down there doing bits and pieces, and you know, then word of mouth, I suppose, it's still your best advertising you can get, without a doubt. And even to today, you know, word of mouth and, you know, the relationships we have with our clients. So we've got a fairly strong brand name, which helps. And especially when it comes to things like dogs, you know, someone's at the dog park and they're talking to their mates and, you know, someone's dog's been silly or been crazy and, oh yeah, I use this guy, and, you know, it definitely is our best benefit without a doubt.
How did you know that working with dogs was the right path for you?
Look, it was interesting. There was a few different sort of scenarios. I sort of got to that point where I've been working with the government for a while and wanted that sort of change of life and stuff. And you've got your mortgages paid off, and you know, you've got that little bit more flexibility. And you know, there was a few options I was looking at starting up. You know, I was looking at starting up a gym at one stage. Starting up dogs, or starting up a tattoo studio. In all honesty, they were the three we were looking at.
Very different.
Very different. And the interesting thing was getting into the dog stuff was the one that needed the least capital, and that was probably the reason it started. And yeah, it's probably the best thing I've ever done, in all honesty.
Your experience with the physical aspect, being fit. We were talking about your martial arts training before.
Yeah.
How do you feel that's assisted you in your training?
Oh, look, a lot of people believe that the number one way that dogs communicate is through barking. And it's not. In all honesty, barking's probably down the bottom. You know, there's things like facial expression, body positioning, there's all these things that come into play. But one of the major ways that animals communicate is through transfer of energy. And what you find in yourself, if you train and you're fit and you're just confident, it usually, there's a level of calmness that comes with that, you know, sort of inner calmness, as well as we sort of present that way a lot more, that sort of almost complacency. And they're all really good energies to have when you're working with animals, you know. And I'm sure we've, you know, talked about this on numerous occasions, but if you're an anxious person, you're going to have an anxious dog because the dog's feeding off your energy. If you can be calm and more confident, your dog will look to you for direction. If you panic the first time something goes wrong, then the dog's going to panic, or even worse, get into a position where they think they need to be involved and take charge, and that's where reactivity comes from. So your ability to train and keep yourself fit and strong and just feel good about yourself and be confident definitely helps with your ability to manage animals.
Since you started, how has your career developed in the different facets of what you do, and what does your role entail now?
Well, when we first started off, it was very much, we were very clear from the start. I didn't really have any interest in running puppy schools and those sort of things. It was more about one-on-one stuff. And with my philosophy, dogs are fully trained. And I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but you look at a puppy and it's with its mother. It doesn't run up and jump on mum. Mum will correct those behaviours. It knows good things happen when I'm calm. It looks for direction. It's very much fully trained when we get a puppy. But then we go home, sit on the floor, the puppy jumps up on us, we pick up and kiss it and tell us we love it. And basically we're reinforcing all the behaviours that we don't want to happen. So to me, it was all about teaching the person. And I must admit, the minute I see dog trainer written in someone's bio or those sort of things, even though you called me a dog trainer at the start, I get a little bit concerned because it's not about training the dog. To me, the dog's fully trained. We've got to train the people. It's all about our inability to communicate is where our problems come from. And, so when we started, it was very much clearly sort of defined to me that we need to talk to people. So we started off with one-on-one consultations and helping people with their dogs. And our original sort of business model was we'd like to get to people when they get a puppy, so we could work with them as a puppy and avoid behavioural issues as time goes on, because it's so much easier to bring them up properly rather than trying to modify behaviour down the track. But unfortunately, people don't like spending money until there is a problem. So that was a bit of a flaw in my business model. But, so we started off one-on-one consultations. That went fairly well. We got invited or asked to help find and source dogs to be used in some TV commercials. So we started doing that sort of work. There was a while there where there was, we had project building companies over here that build houses, and typical sort of Australian thing. They got this house and they have this blonde-headed lady, blonde-headed man, two little blonde-headed kids and two golden retrievers in every picture. That's like the model Australian family,
Yeah.
And we supplied every golden retriever that got used in these photos for years. It's
your fault. Everyone wants a golden retriever.
And a blonde-haired, blue-eyed wife.
Yeah.
I've bugged up everything for us.
I think that started way before them.
Yeah, we stuffed up everything. But we did all that sort of stuff. And then, especially, you got to remember, we've done this a really long time. So the role of the dog in the community and what we can use them for has changed a lot since we've been doing this stuff. And probably the most recent sort of stuff we've been into, and when we say recent, it might be 5 or 6 years, is the accreditation of therapy dogs.
Tell me a bit more about that.
There's a lot of confusion between a service dog and a therapy dog, and that's probably what we're going to look at first. A service dog is a super highly trained dog, and it's specifically designed for the health needs of an individual. And our best example of a service dog is something like a seeing eye dog. You're blind, here's your dog to help you get around. We have service dogs for people who have blood sugar levels and warnings and those sort of things. So it's very much for an individual's needs. Where we have a therapy dog is designed to help a multitude of people in a multitude of environments. So, dogs that can go to schools, dogs that can go to old age care and these sort of things. And I've got a fairly young child that we put through a Montessori school, and they start school very young. They start at 3 there. And we were bringing one of our dogs in bits and pieces, and we ended up putting a dog there every morning. And just the advantage for young kids going to school and getting met by the dog just breaks down that getting away from mum. So, the advantages and things like that are huge. And aged care, we've gone to places where there might be some guy that's sitting in a room that's, poor old bugger's got dementia and, hasn't talked for, 6 or 7 months, just sits there, and we walk in and he stands up and screams out dog and everyone nearly falls over, So that link we have with animals and the ability we can provide that through therapy dogs is immense. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. It's great for our dog to, be able to go out and work in those environments, plus the benefit it provides people in so many different areas, it's just, unmeasurable.
If you Google on the internet dog training, I know you prefer dog behaviourist, is that correct? But the general term dog training, there's so many answers that come up, and there's dozens and dozens now of different pathways.
Yeah.
But I would group those into two major opposing schools, and correct me if I would be mistaken. So they stem from either a dominance or alpha training or a reward-based training style. Would that be fair to say?
Yep, and I suppose there's a third group, which is a combination of both, which I think is where I try to go to and what it is. Look, positive reward training, it's very interesting. It's a style of training that I get and I understand what you're trying to achieve. But my background specifically, I'm about what happens in nature. And we'll sort of get to your question in a minute. But interestingly, if we look at dogs in general, that haven't had human contact, like let's pretend we went to Bali or we went Malaysia street dogs, or Thailand, we have this large population of street dogs. You would not find one dog that's anxious. You would not find dogs that are reactive. You wouldn't find dogs that are resource guarding. You wouldn't see any of these sort of behaviours that we as a dog owner associate as a normal dog behaviour. So, and that's really important, because if my dog's pulling on the lead, or my dog's trying to kill everyone, or my dog's weeing in the house, or my dog's jumping all over me, or my dog's just being crazy, none of those are normal dog behaviours. They're behaviours that somehow, I've created, or, that's been developed in the dog, which aren't a normal dog behaviour. So when we start looking at, how to interact with our dog and what builds our best relationships, it's really important that we sort of draw from nature, because that's what it's all about. And, nature obviously is our best tool, because all these dogs that are street dogs, they might be skinny, they might be full of fleas, they might have mange, but psychologically they're pretty good. So, I'm buggering them up somehow. So I've got to look at what happens in nature. And interestingly, in nature, there's no reward. And people sort of struggle with this, but there's no reward. And I've sat on the whelping box looking at a litter of puppies for like 8 weeks, trying to find one instance where a female dog will act, or the mum dog will reward good behaviour. And she doesn't. She just ignores them. And it's very interesting. As a human, if I do something wrong, there's a consequence. If I do something no one cares about, it's ignored. And if I do something really good, there's a reward. So there's 3 options for my behaviour as a human. In nature, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about, horses that live in, herds, or lions, or anything in a group, there's only 2 consequences. If you do something that no one cares about, it's ignored. If you do something that's bad, it's corrected. If I do something that's really good, that's just ignored as well. So there's only ignoring and correction in nature. So when we bring in something like positive reward training, it's really a foreign concept, because there's no reward in nature. So to have a training philosophy that's purely based on something that doesn't happen in nature, it's fundamentally sort of flawed before we start. And, I'm not saying, and then you get these dogs that aren't food orientated, or they get to that point where, the stimulation is like 7, 8, 9, 10, we're in that red zone, and you can have whatever treat you like, and the dog's not going to care about that. Your dog needs to do what you want it to do, or follow you, or look for instruction for you, because it trusts you, because it believes you're a good decision maker, because it believes every decision you make is in the dog's best interest and the pack's best interest, not because there's something in it for the dog. And, you can always tell the dogs that are positively trained reward. The owner's got a bum bag full of sausages, and the dog's prancing with his head stuck in the bum bag, and sitting, you shovel one in and stand and shovel. The dog's like a junkie, and look, it's great. If it works for you, knock yourself out. I haven't got a problem with that. But to me, you'd be surprised how many times that doesn't work. And again, the reason why it doesn't work is because it's not natural, if that makes sense. And, you go to the other side, which is, dogs are a pack animal. And you can say what you like and say, oh, they're family members. And I know there'll be people watching this saying, oh, my God, he's such a rock ape, The bottom lines are a pack animal. Dogs haven't changed. Society's changed, and how we view the dog has changed. But, they're still a pack animal. And that how we've changed is the issue, not how dogs have changed. Because, obviously you may be a bit young and you love it when I call you young, but
I do love it.
when I was a kid, or anyone watching this was a kid, who is like, say, 35 or younger, as a kid, there was no such thing as an anxious dog. There was no such thing as a dog that has separation anxiety. Dogs weren't on psych medication because dogs were dogs. Now they're a fur baby and off their head. So that transition from dog to fur baby obviously isn't for the dog. That's for us, because how we view dogs and what we see dogs as and what we use them for has changed without understanding the psychology of the dog, and we create all these behaviours. If that makes sense.
I agree with you. I understand, though, why there are so many platforms that advocate against any sort of alpha-based training. If I can use an extreme example, it's sort of, I'm not as young as I look, Paul. So I was raised in the days of it's still okay to discipline your child.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of parenting techniques that are more new age are like, you shouldn't say no to your child, you shouldn't overcorrect your child, and definitely never use any form of physical correction. And there are many people that would advocate for that, because the fear is if we advocate for a little bit, it turns into abuse.
Yeah.
So I understand the official stance of a lot of organizations where they say we absolutely cannot have any alpha-based or dominance-based training, because the fear is then we'll start to churn out these abusive dog owners. Whereas a more balanced viewpoint would be, it's the same as parenting. When is correction necessary? Well, in certain circumstances. When is a reward necessary, let's say for a child, in certain circumstances. So it's always knowing what you're trying to achieve, would you say, and also
Absolutely.
understanding the character of the dog. And if you have a blanket rule like never reward based or never dominance based, that can be a little dangerous.
And absolutely. And it's interesting, it's not as much, because the term alpha gets kicked around. And as a behaviourist, like years ago when I first started, it was all about the alpha. And the alpha is the one that sort of sets the rules up and he's the disciplinarian. But quite interestingly, if you had a pack of, say, 30 dogs in a pack, and dog number 30 down the bottom of the pack does something that's inappropriate or not in the pack's best interest, the alpha doesn't come down and chip him. Dog 29 will bite him on the bum and say, hey, that's not cool. So it's all about, structure more than the alpha role.
The hierarchy?
Absolutely. And just about what's best for everyone else and where it goes through. And, there's the trouble with disciplining your dog, most people get this thing of discipline and they'll see some guy got his dog on a lead and he's kicking the bejesus out of him. And trust me, if I saw that, I'd be kicking the guy to death. It's not going to happen. But correcting your dog isn't a negative thing. Like, correction is actually part of their communication strategy, and it's not viewed as a negative thing. If I said to you, you are the worst interviewer in the world, this is shit, and, I've wasted my time, you wouldn't talk to me for a week, because we hate being corrected. Dogs actually enjoy correction. It provides structure and leadership. If I say you can't do something, I must be in charge. And you know what? They're a submissive animal by nature. They have to be submissive being a pack animal. If dogs were dominant, they'd be killing each other. They couldn't live together. Same with lions, horses, all these sort of stuff that lives together. It must be submissive by nature. So what we find is that, if I don't, put enough structure in place, that's where the anxiety comes from a dog. If I don't put enough leadership in place, that, again, creates anxiety in my dog. And the interesting thing is, I couldn't really tell you, if we're going somewhere, there's very rare times that I need to correct my dog. Because when you correct your dog, the correction is because they've made a decision that's inappropriate. Dogs really don't make decisions. They've got to go with the flow. If every dog made a decision, they would have died out 50,000 years ago, the pack killing each other. So, when you get that good leadership role and your dog looks to you for direction, you need to correct your dog is hardly ever there, because they're just happy to go with the flow. When we don't provide that leadership and the dog's trying to make decisions for themselves and get involved in situations it shouldn't, and it's stressed and anxious because it's responsible for everything, that's where we have all our problems. But, it's funny, you do something loving to a human, hopefully that human appreciates it. You do something loving to your dog goes, oh, you weak bugger, now I've got to look after you. They're just so different to us psychologically.
Mm.
And that's where we come unstuck. You know?
Give me an example of what you just mentioned that would be demonstrative of a loving touch from an owner that would be seen as weakness from a dog.
One of the big ones that I have is, and this is sort of my number one rule for dog owners. So, you know, I hope everyone donates to KL Beach Resort for getting a free consultation.
Thank you.
But one of my big things is, if your dog comes into your personal space without being invited, send him out. Count to 10, then call him. You know, and the reason behind that, like if I come over, and obviously we know each other, but say I come over and I walk straight into your personal space and put my head on your lap, what would you do? Get out of here. You know, what are you doing, you weirdo? You know, yet my dog does it and I reward it. And that's a dominant gesture. That's not a loving gesture. That's dominant. He's entering your personal space without being invited. He's making physical contact without you, but he's coming in. You know, so really what should happen is your dog should stop about a metre away and just look at you. You go, yeah, come on. And you invite him in. Then the pat is rewarding him for being submissive and looking for direction and being a good dog. Whereas if he just comes in and drops his head on your lap, you're rewarding him for being dominant, making decisions and acting out. And once we reward a behaviour, what we're saying is that behaviour is acceptable everywhere, all the time. And like we said, there's not a lot of reward in nature. So it's a foreign concept that has a huge impact. So once I reward dominance in the house, or we're doing, dog leans up against me, or I open the door and the dog pushes out in front of me, or dog's hit me with his paw, which is one of the most, you know, shake hands, you know, like, oh my God, why we teach dogs to shake hands? It's one of the most dominant gestures dogs do. They lift their paw and actually lifting it to put it on the head of another dog to push it down to reinforce their dominance. So dog's there and he puts his paw on my lap and then and I'm, yeah, good boy, I love you too. All I'm saying is, yeah, look, you're in charge. And then I walk out the front door and he lunges at someone on a push bike and tries to kill him. That's pretty well the same behaviour as what he displayed here. Yet this one I'm rewarding and this one I'm like, oh my God, where did this come from? But it's all the same stuff.
Once again, it's a lot easier to educate people if there is a blanket rule. But the tricky thing is that blanket rules hardly ever exist.
Yeah.
Would I be incorrect in assuming that it depends also on the intention of the dog? So, for example, if I've got a dog that is by character an alpha, or, you know, the dominant type,
yep,
versus a dog that is generally very submissive. Like I've got a little Dashie.
Yep.
She's generally a super submissive dog.
Yep.
But when I come home, open the door, she'll run straight up to me. So even though I haven't verbally given her the signal that that's okay, through my body language, my posture, my own excitement,
yeah,
she reads it as mum's home.
Yeah.
She'll come up to me. She'll do a little jumpy.
Yeah.
Okay, want pats, make a squeal.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Versus a dog that I already know has a dominant characteristic, and I would correct if they display that sort of behaviour. Am I wrong in that point of view, Paul? Should I be correcting her?
Look, yes, in a nutshell. And again, it's more about we've got to be mindful of the behaviour that we're rewarding. So if your dog sees you and gets all excited and starts jumping up and down and, you know, and I reward that behaviour, what I'm saying is that behaviour is acceptable. And the dog sort of, it's almost like, well, that's how I meet everyone. That becomes acceptable. So then you go to the dog park and your little dog sees a Rottweiler and runs over and meets the Rottweiler the same way, meets you and gets towed up. And we've sort of created that a little bit. But, you know, the interesting thing in that, Shannon, you know, this is your cute little, you know, fur baby comes running to the front door to you. I guarantee if he was a 60-kilo Rottweiler, he wouldn't be doing that.
Correct.
And that's one of the problems we have with smaller dogs, because we don't have that physical consequence of inappropriate behaviour. You know, if you've got a little dog and it's standing up on its back legs, so you know, carrying on, oh my God, it's so cute, it's so beautiful. You know, if I had, you know, a big dog doing that and or jumping up or runs up and jumps up and sits on my lap and, oh, this is so beautiful. If I had a big dog doing that, you know, the physical consequences, it'd be like, oh my God, what are you doing? You're hurting me. You just wouldn't let it happen. So it's very interesting with the size of the dog. As a dog owner, my perception of what's an acceptable behaviour changes dramatically. But one of the interesting things is, like, dogs will come from Great Wolves, you know, and over years we have bred physical deformities, I guess, into dogs to get them to present differently. And, you know, the more you've got to squint to see a grey wolf in your dog, the more physical deformities that have been bred in that dog through life. And to the point where we get dogs now that can't even reproduce naturally. They'll be born by cesareans and can't breathe. And poor little pug sneezes and his eye falls out. Like it's shit. So but psychologically, dogs are very similar. Like obviously there's dogs which have been bred for special traits, whether it's a retriever or a herder. But you see a herder like a some sort of cattle dog, and he's at the local show and he's herding up sheep. He didn't fall out of his mum with those skills. Someone spent thousands of hours getting him to that point. And for the one dog that made it, there's been 500 dogs free to good home that haven't made it that the farmer didn't want. So but apart from that, psychologically, dogs are very, very similar. But we treat them differently based on size. And that's where we have so many issues. And that's why we have such a high level of anxiety in smaller dogs, because we allow them to be so much more dominant because it hasn't got the consequences.
So treat them all the same, irrespective of size.
Absolutely.
Takeaway.
Yep. And breed, it's they don't know they're any different. It's all very much the same.
Can we go back to the reward training versus the dominance style of training?
Yeah.
A common struggle for owners is not having their dogs pull on the lead when they're trying to walk them.
Yeah.
Can you give us examples of how someone would correct that using the reward only based training versus the style that you prefer?
Well, it's interesting. Okay, the pulling on the lead, we need to understand why our dog feels the need to pull on the lead. And what we find is when dogs migrate, and it all comes back to that wolf migration sort of stuff, they have an arrowhead formation, and you'll see it quite clearly. Whoever's in charge, then they'll go 2, 3, 4, and they come back. It's very clear sort of structure where they go. So your dog needs to be out in front because they're walking you literally on what's going on. So the best way to sort of counter that is to reinforce to the dog that you don't need to walk me, I can walk you. And trust me, your dog's happier cruising along beside you instead of being out in front looking where and having to pee on everything and mark my territory and sniff it. Bruce, what are you doing here? And it becomes quite anxious when you're responsible for everyone. So your dog enjoys so much more walking next to you or slightly behind you, tail down, nose down, just cruising. It's a lot nicer walk. But when we have the situation where we have a positive reward situation, the minute the dog will be starting to get in front, we'll pull him back, we'll tell him to sit, we'll give him a reward, then we'll step off again and we'll try to reward him for being in that place at the moment. And another form of training they use with treats is where they use redirection. Where my dog's barking at the door over there, so I throw a treat over here. So he runs over and gets the treat here, and that stops him barking at the door. And I think, what am I doing here? And then I've actually had clients, and I said, look, you've got to come over because my dog kept jumping on the bench. And I had a dog trainer over, and I said, well, you've got to redirect the dog. So I get a bag of treats, and if he jumps on the bench, I throw the treat in this corner. This lady rings me up and said, you've got to come over. I can't afford this, And she's got this dog now, and it's huge. The dog's like a beast as a beast. And the dog waddles over to the bench, so it hurls up one paw, doesn't even stop, turns in the air, already come over and sit here waiting for the treat to arrive. So redirection works really well. So
well-trained dog.
Absolutely, he got it last week in Australia. But it's just interesting. So look, that's the idea with rewarding. Rewarding is about trying to get the dog to do what we want by rewarding him at a certain time. However, as a dog owner, quite often how the dog is at that time when I'm rewarding isn't what I think it is. One of our biggest things is we get caught up where our dog is physically. Sit. Our dog's bum hits the ground for 1 second. His tail's cleaning the floor 100 miles an hour, he's completely off his head. We go, oh, good dog, and poke a treat down his throat. He's not a good dog, he's off his head. And we see it all the time, like sit. Someone pats the dog, which is rewarding the dog, and the dog explodes because the dog's at this high energy state. I reward him for being high energy, and he takes off again. So, when we start rewarding a dog, we've got to really make sure I'm rewarding the dog where he is psychologically, not where he is physically. So I don't care whether my dog's sitting, standing, dropping, I don't give a shit what it's doing. As long as it's calm and looking for direction, good things will happen. So, and again, and back to the original question, like when we're correcting our dog when we're walking, it's about, the tug on the lead, which is the physical correction, like, hey, no, get them back. Dogs use 3 things to correct each other. Use sight, sound, physical contact, they escalate. The first thing a dog does is it gives off a visual sort of warning to another dog. It shows its teeth, it drops its head and gets that big nape on its neck. It'll bring its ears forward, it'll show its teeth. It's visually saying to this dog, hey, you're not doing the right thing by me. If a dog doesn't pick that up, it then escalates the sound and they go sort of roof, and that's that short, sharp sound. That put the focus on me. Hey, I'm trying to give you the heads up. I'm not cool with this. And then finally, a dog will come to physical contact where it comes out and it sort of bites the other dog. Quite often they don't bite because being a carnivore, they've got curved teeth, and if they bite something, a lot of dogs don't have the angulation in their head to actually release, especially mums with puppies and stuff. They don't want to go biting them. So what they actually do is they come forward and they hit with their two front teeth. It's more like a jab, to correct that behaviour. And that's the physical component. So if I was walking a dog and I wanted to physically or use a dominating sort of alpha sort of way to sort of manage that situation, like my first would be like I use sound. For that bark, the short, sharp sound, I click my fingers, clap my hands, that short, sharp sound, get the focus on me. If that didn't work, give the lead a bit of a jerk and go back. But like I said earlier, Shannon, we focus on what I need to do or believe the problem's the walking of the dog. But it's not. The problem is the relationship and the interactions I've had with the dog previous to that, which creates the relationship between the dog and me and where our hierarchy is. And that will be how our walk will be based on that, not as much what happens at the moment.
So all the behaviours between myself and my pet that lead up to that moment in time,
yes,
will affect how they deal with the corrections.
Absolutely. It's all about, and I guess it's a lot like us, if something goes down and something happens and you're in a relationship or you're with someone who you have confidence in or people you trust, how you respond to that situation is very different to if you've got to be in charge of that situation. Like it's those dynamics of how any situation unfolds is based on the relationship of how you are with the people, and that's what happens with our dogs. And, it's funny, you train and, you're athletic as well. I'm used to, someone gets a bit of a fat guts or pot belly and I'm going to start doing sit-ups. The spot work, like we got this in our mind, and we know it's not that spot stuff. You want to, it's about your diet, it's overall exercise,
It's a holistic view.
Absolutely. And that's what our dog is. The problem isn't my dog pulls on the lead. The problem isn't my dog barks at the front door, but these are all outcomes. And you get to the point where you open the door and the dog just sits there and looks at you and waits to be invited in your house. And you're sitting on the lounge, the dog comes up and stops a metre away from you and looks for direction. Or, you put the lead on the dog and the dog just remains calm and walks with you to the front door. At those sort of points, all your behavioural issues are gone because the dog is happy to look for direction and submissive. And they're just so much calmer. And, the trouble with dominance, and it's the biggest problem we have with our dogs now is I don't understand how my dog presents, and everything that I think is a loving gesture from my dog is actually a dominant gesture. And then I reward it. So I'm telling my dog that you're in charge. Now, my dog's a submissive animal by nature that gets rewarded, and good things happen when you're calm and looking for direction. But I'm getting that dog to be dominant and telling him good things happen when you're excited. So I literally reprogrammed the dog, 180 degrees from where they were designed to live their lives. And at that point, all of a sudden, my submissive animal is a dominant and they're responsible for everything. And that's where the anxiety comes in. And the amount of owners that confuse anxiety and energy. Now, if you've got a dog and you take it for a walk, you go for a big, long walk and you come home and the dog still follows you around the house and still got to run around the backyard and does his perimeter checks and still can't settle, that dog's anxious. You can physically drain energy. As you know, we all train. I can go out there and train my ass off and I crawl out, the gym. But if something's wrong and I'm anxious or I'm nervous and you've got that sick feeling in your tummy, no matter what I do in the gym, that's still there, and that's what anxiety is. And then, our inability to manage anxiety, and then, we don't identify as our first thing. And then we try things like enrichment, and all this sort of stuff, which, if there's a term that really annoys me with dogs and that's one of the big fad things now is enrichment for your dog,
The licky mats.
Oh, scuffle mats, licky mats, all this sort of crap, If your dog, the trouble with enrichment, and let's pretend enrichment works where my dog sits there and licks the mat for 3 hours. Yeah, great outcome. But all I'm really doing is masking the symptoms. I'm not addressing the problem. And that's what.
Plus, it's got no tongue left.
Oh, You go fluff and shit. But it just is crazy, you know. And it's funny, as humans, a lot of us, and you're the same as me, we don't sit still well. We've always got to do something. Probably on this spectrum, ADHD, you know, but what you find is with an animal, if I'm not, especially a dog, if I'm not hunting, breeding, fornicating, migrating, I'm sleeping. And the inability for our dog to do that just highlights again the problems with anxiety. And like I said, when I was a kid and you were a kid, I never ever heard of the term anxiety in dogs. It just didn't exist. But as we've brought them into our lives and we've treated them more like people and rewarded the wrong behaviours, we've created anxiety. And it doesn't mean for 1 minute that your dog shouldn't be in the house and it shouldn't be your best friend and you shouldn't love them to death and do everything. But we've got to understand how we can achieve all those things without compromising them. And that's where it goes pear-shaped.
I just want to reiterate for everyone watching that the correction, the jab that you sort of gestured out,
Yep.
that the mother would do to the puppy,
Yep.
is not a slap on the nose.
Yep.
It's not a kick in the ribs.
No.
It's not a slap on the behind.
No.
It's none of those things.
No.
It's a very quick.
Yep. And it's just about getting the focus back on me again. It's not about, and it's interesting, you know, we look at the way dogs correct each other, and they are brutal. You know, like I've had puppies that have had ears removed by mothers, broken legs, cracked ribs, you know, like when mum corrects a puppy or dogs correct each other, they're pretty well full on. And a lot of that is because if a puppy does something inappropriate, enters mum's personal space without being invited, or those sort of things, and mum doesn't correct it, and the puppy goes to do that in, you know, 2 weeks' time to an adult male dog, he's going to kill him, you know. So they are very sort of full on with their corrections. And, you know, it's not about the level of intensity in the correction or any of these sort of things. It's same as you know, if someone you respect tells you to do something, you'll take it on board. If someone you think's an absolute dick and haven't got a clue till you do, say, yeah, no worries, mate, just walk off. And that's where building that good relationship with your dog does the work for you. You know, if my dog thinks it's dominant over me and doesn't take on board my decisions or thinks I'm a terrible decision maker, irrespective of what I do to correct that dog, the dog's not going to take it on board. Whereas if I'm a good leader and I've got a lot of structure in my house that reinforces, I make the calls and, you know, everything goes. And hey, dog, I'm not doing that then. Because they respect your decision making and they trust you. And it's all about trust. And that's what we've got to build with our relationships with our dog. You know, our dog needs to look to us. And when you get that dog looks you in the eyes and you feel it almost melting, you know, that's that, like, it's almost like a cult. You know, like you're the supreme leader. You know, whatever you do, I will do because I trust you and your decisions are great. And I know all your decisions are made for what's best for me. And that's what we want from our dog. And that's how we build it.
Can I also add to that, it's the intention in which the correction is given, whether it's just spoken or whether it's a quick touch.
Yeah.
If you're doing it in anger, impatience, if you yourself are very emotional and you escalate it, that correction becomes less effective. It has to be given in a calm, confident, assertive.
And I guess that's, you know, we spoke about this very early where we talked about, you know, the transfer of energy. And I guess that comes with all training of our dogs at any level where we're going anyway, or what we're doing. The more frustrated I get, obviously the more energy I get off. Look, I'm not a scientist and I don't know whether this is true, but I got it told to me where we were Neanderthals, the number one way that we communicated was transfer of energy. You know, we're living in caves, it's dark, we couldn't talk, couldn't do much. So you'd see a, you know, saber-toothed tiger and become anxious and I'd feel it and I'd run. So it was one of our big things. As humans evolved and they went outside and they started sort of in the sunlight, we started, you know, using facial expressions and hand signals, and then we learned to talk, all these things that were more effective for communicating over distances rather than energy, you know. So our ability to pick up energy has dropped a lot as a human. Yeah, sure, we still pick it up. You get someone that gives you the creeps, you can feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up, and, you know, it's still there. But apparently we still give off energy at the same levels as what we did when we were Neanderthals, and our dog picks that up, you know. So if I'm trying to get my dog to do something or communicate with my dog, and did like, you know, if you're all worked up or hyped up or angry or anxious, my ability to communicate gets compromised dramatically because what I'm trying to achieve is lost or diluted in the energy I'm sending out there as well. So, you know, like I said at the very start, energy is huge. And, you know, like even if you're going to take your dog for a walk at night, you know, if you've had a shit day at work and you come home and, you know, you're all bent out of shape and you're running late, oh shit, I've got to take this dog for a walk, and you're rushing around and you're already sort of off your head before you start. Don't take the dog for a walk. It's going to be a shit walk. Go home, have a glass of wine, settle down, take it for a walk first thing in the morning. It's all about building that good quality time with our dog. We get that pressure where we need to do things, and we end up having really bad interactions. It's about good quality time and making sure. Now, one of my things, and we've worked together at different places, and especially if I've got some dog that's got a bit of form and it's bitten someone, it's a bit reactive, and I'm rocking up and this thing sort of howling and snarling, at the kennel. The first thing I'll do is stand back and look between you and me. Like I'm like this, I'm a bit panicky on what's going to go on. But if I'm standing there and I'm all apprehensive and nervous, I'm going to get bitten straight away. So the first thing I do is I've got to stand back and take a couple of deep breaths and, just make sure I'm in a good space and I'm feeling comfortable and confident, and then I'll move in.
Paul, I like to think that most people who decide to take on a dog, they want to do the best they can.
Yep.
They would like to be a good owner. What makes a good owner?
Look, I think a good owner is very much obviously, the trouble we have with society, I guess, now is that if we were to sit down and say we go to the park, and it'd be fun to do this, but I know the answer, and we were to say, grab 20 people with dogs and say, what do you need to be a good owner? And they'd go, oh, you've got to take a dog for a walk, got to make sure they have their vet checks, they've got to have good food, you've got to buy them something for their teeth, some sort of dental cleaner. We'd get all these sort of answers. And you know what? They're all dead right. But they miss a very good point. Every one of those answers is for our dog physically. And it's interesting, everyone talks about, these days, and the advances we've made in dog health, with, annual injections and, even with breeding programs where we do, they check your teeth, your eyes, hip dysplasia, all these things before we breed. Like none of this was around when I was a kid. So physically, our dog, and even diet, you look at some of the nutritional value that's in dog food these days, and wow, like there's so much effort put into it. But all that stuff's for the physical side of the dog. And the one thing that we really sort of lack is to provide that good, psychological health for our dog. And, the most important thing to be a good dog owner to me is to be a good leader, and provide that, because I don't want my dog anxious. I want my dog to trust me, my dog to be happy when he's around me and confident that I take all the pressure off him. All that other stuff, that comes naturally. But as time goes on, we find that our focus on dog owners, everything's with the physical aspect and there's nothing with the psychological. And, I go and see people, and especially if you've got a very submissive dog, if you've got a very submissive dog, you need to be an even better leader than if you have a dog that's a little bit less submissive, because that submissive dog is going to get his confidence from you. If you've got a submissive dog and you're like, oh, it's okay, it's all right, and he's going, shit, you don't know what to do, I don't know, there's no one in charge here, and they become worse. So they really need that leadership. And it's so important, with submissive dogs to provide that leadership and that good structure. And, that's something we just don't talk about. And I'll go and see people with a submissive dog and I'll say to them, look, you wouldn't dream of not giving this dog food and water, because that would be as cruel as cruel. You're not being a good leader and putting a lot of structure in place and just taking the psychological pressure off this dog. It's just as cruel as not giving him food and water. And people don't see that. And I say that a lot to people, you would not feed them. Not providing leadership is just as unhealthy for this guy. It just presents a different way.
And I do see that a lot, particularly with rescue dogs, where people feel so sorry for whatever the dog has gone through in the past, and they have, imagined stories in their mind.
Yeah, mum was on crack, dad used to feed him. Yeah, we get all that.
Which I understand some rescues, they like to play on that because, their dog, let's take it home today.
And it's funny. It's quite interesting. We always have a bit of a laugh where if I had a dog come through our rescue that was severely mistreated, let's pretend he was really, like top end, broken bones, beaten up, whatever, we'd get him, we'd patch him up and, get him back to normal, and it's time for adoption. And you come into the adopt dog and you say, oh, hi, Paul, this is a beautiful little dog, what's the story with this dog? I say, oh, you wouldn't believe it, he's only been here one day, he got surrendered last night. Mum, dad, 2 little kids, loved him to death. They had to go to South Africa. He couldn't get a rabies injection, so they had to leave him behind. He's only been here one night. because I don't want people trying to make up for all the bad stuff, because that puts them at a lower energy and less leadership than again. And we see that a lot where a rescue dog will come out, it's had a bad life, or it's actually regressed when it goes out because people trying to make up for all the bad stuff. And the trouble with people who rescue dogs is they're all nice people. They want to make the difference and they want to go there. But it's really important that, it's more important to us where we think of all the bad stuff. The dog really doesn't care. Like if animals live in the moment, they have to breed, eat, hunt. Life goes on, so they can't really sort of worry about shit too much. But when we hang on to it, we actually can hold the dog back and not let it progress or come out of its shell, because we're focusing on all the negatives and just keeping the dog in that space.
Yeah, you see it happen all the time. The new owners will coddle the dog and not want to tell the dog off in case it traumatizes the dog and it adds to the dog's anxiety. And it does the total opposite thing.
Yeah, it traumatizes us.
Yeah, because there's no leadership shown.
And again, it's quite interesting. And I'm sure you've had this where you'll get a dog and it'll get, someone will take the dog and they'll take it home and they ring up and, oh, this is the best dog I've ever had, And then a week's time they ring up and say, oh, look, he's a great dog, but he's just displaying a few weird things. And then 2 weeks later he comes back. Yeah. And, because he started at the bottom of the pack and he was allowed to be a bit dominant, someone rewarded, so he pushed it and pushed it. Next minute now he thinks he owns the place. He's bailing everyone up and everyone's sitting on the floor because he owns the lounge. And, it just goes crazy. That same dog comes back to the rescue. We keep him, 2 weeks later, someone else adopts him, goes out. The minute he tries to do anything dominant, no, they pull him up, they keep him. He's the best dog in the world. And literally, he's exposed to the exact same stimuli and situations, but presents completely different because of where he sits in the pack structure. And these are all the examples that I sort of call on when I'm telling people, because, look, I know people, will have different views to mine and everything else, but there's so much stuff that I believe out there in nature that I use to support my views, I guess, And that's one of those classic examples where, dogs don't have behaviours, they have jobs. And, you will have seen it yourself. It's hilarious how, things can change so quickly just by what we allow the dog to do.
Now, Paul, you've done a lot of work with rescues. In fact, that's how we met, because you're also passionate about matching dogs to the right homes and vice versa, and helping people throughout the adoption process with your advice on what would be best for them and also what boundaries to set up initially. I come from a very biased perspective when it comes to adoption versus the purchase of animals, because of spending so many years running a rescue. And it's a little bit different in the country where we're based, because buying and selling of animals is not highly regulated, to say the least. So we've rescued dogs from horrible circumstances that have been kept in tiny cages in the dark for years on end. And some of them, when they come out, they can't even walk in a straight line, mate. And they're blind almost from being in darkness for that many years. It's a terrifying situation. So when I first started doing the rescue in Malaysia and then I came back here, I almost had a visceral reaction to people buying purebreds and breeding dogs. And I had to kind of talk myself out of that, because I know it's different in different places. But having worked in rescue and adoption for so long, is there a justification nowadays when there are so many dogs needing homes for people to continue breeding and buying?
A lot of people will want something specific, I guess, and that's where the breeds come from, and what they want in a dog. I guess purely from a perspective of there's that many unwanted dogs and, rescue dogs around, there's no need for any pedigree breeds to be there, But in saying that, if you didn't have the pedigree breeding and those sort of things, and someone wants a specific dog or a smaller dog or a type of dog, then that person doesn't get a dog, because you're not going to find a Pomeranian puppy in a rescue, and these sort of things. So, look, I get I get exactly what you're saying, and the one thing about the purebred side, I guess, is at least, when we talk about dogs and people buying from registered breeders and these things, statistically, if a person's going to go to that length and pay, and you could be paying, anywhere between $5,000 and $9,000 for a puppy nowadays, that dog is probably going to be in a better environment, and the chance, and as you know, when we run a rescue, you don't get many purebred dogs come through the rescue. The rescue is basically fueled by mixed breed dogs that come out of low social economic areas, which are sort of, intentionally bred for the wrong reason or bred because people don't manage their dogs correctly. So, if you were to stop purebred dogs and tell everybody to just get a rescue dog, I don't think that there'd be certain people that would buy a rescue dog. They just don't want to, staffy, cross, whatever. I want something soft and fluffy, whatever I want. And I think that the issue is more about we need to sort of educate, be involved, free sterilisation, put more penalties in place as well. Look, obviously in Malaysia, you don't have the law that sort of, enforces what you want. But over here, we've got the law, but just doesn't seem to have the resources to carry it out. We get the rangers coming in all the time, that are taking dogs from the same houses and stuff, and it just seems to continue. So, look, they're two separate issues. I don't know if killing one would sort of benefit the other, but it's just about personal preference. Like if you were told you could only have a white car, but you wanted a silver car, well, I'm going to catch the bus then. Where does it sort of go to?
Yes.
But it's a good point. And look, rescues have raised that a lot, and I know there's almost that conflict between places over here, which is Dog West, which is the pedigree sort of breeding areas, and they control all the dogs' papers and everything's registered through there, and rescues, and that well, why are people buying pedigree dogs when we've got all these dogs at the rescue? Because they want a pedigree dog.
Yes.
So yeah, it's not as clear cut.
Sure.
As that sort of stuff.
And that is the reality.
Yeah.
We don't live in an idealistic society. And by the same token, even though I do have a mini Dachshund at home, she was adopted.
Yeah.
And I can't foresee that I would ever buy a dog ever again, particularly with the work that I've done. But I think it would be a shame at the same time not to have the breeds, the way that they've been bred, and the characteristics that define that breed.
Yeah.
I do find there's a beauty in that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, look, they're almost like art, I guess. And I'll look at my painting and scratch my head and say, I've got no idea what this is. And you go, oh, you goose, can't you see this is, and you'll pick it up straight away. So look, there's a lot of personal preference in there, and dogs are a very personal thing. The reason we get the dogs, everyone has a different reason why they get the dog. The type of dog they get, what they want out of their dog, what they intend to expose their dog to. There's a lot of different stuff in there. So, I guess the breed is just part of that. But, the interesting thing is, like the pedigree dogs aren't overbred and end up in shelters. It's all these mixed breed stuff that keep kicking around. And,
do you think that's because if someone's paid so much money for a dog and they're purebred, they're more reluctant to surrender them?
Oh, look, I think so. And look, I think that the other thing too, that they come, if you can afford to buy a dog, you probably own your own house, you're probably in a better financial situation, you're probably more structured in longevity and your plan on life and where you're going to be. I just think it's a more settled sort of owner that will sort of goes down that path. But, we've got, a couple of, different platforms where people can sell mixed breed puppies and things, things like Gumtree. I don't know if there's Gumtree in Malaysia or other
you
places.
have similar classifieds.
Yeah. Probably it's interesting, like a lot of the breeding of dogs is financially motivated, where you get these people, if my dog throws out a litter, I'll get a couple of $100 for a pup, and then it doesn't work out. So next minute I've got all these 16-week-old puppies and I'm trying to dump them because it doesn't work. And that's where we sort of pick up the pieces. So if you could, reduce their ability to profit out of making dogs, that would probably have more to do with it than anything else, So ban the sale of dogs unless they're, on some of these platforms and things like that, and if someone doesn't have the opportunity to make money out of something, maybe they wouldn't even go down that path, So there's got to be other ways we can look at it and see where it goes.
For the person that has their mind made up that I am going to buy a dog, what things should they consider?
If you're going to go through the pedigree breeders and you go through those sort of things over here, if they're going through Dogs West, they're credible. You'll get the papers, it'll have all their grandparents. You'll get a piece of paper that's got hip scores and T scores and I scores of both parents. Quite often they're DNA tested for any genetic things that they go through, and as a puppy even they get them all sorted out. So look, the pedigree side is pretty well a no-brainer. It's all been done for you before you even rock in.
And ethically, how do you ensure that the place that you've got that pet from or bought that pet from is an ethical place?
Well, if they're registered over here, all the litters are actually registered. So what happens is the bitch and the male dog, they're all registered. So they'll go back on their lines to make sure they're not related in any way. They'll make sure that bitch hasn't bred over a certain period of time. That sort of side of it's all regulated. If you're getting a mixed breed dog from somewhere else, that's a different story again. You've really got to take on face value and have a bit of a punt. But your big advantage, of course, being mixed breed, it's going to come from a bigger gene pool. So hopefully, genetically, it's going to be even healthier than your best breed pedigree dog's going to be. So, yeah.
Would you say a good guideline, not from the breeders say, but someplace like Malaysia, where people may not be registered, that you should make sure that you can visit their home environment?
Always see where the dogs come from. Absolutely. And again, the more care and more effort that the breeder has put into the dog that you can see, obviously that care will extend to other facets of the dog behaviour. If I ring up you and you're selling, some little toy poodle cross things, and I'm interested in one, and you say, yeah, I've got 2 left. I'll meet you at the car park, down at the local shopping centre. That's a real flag. And that happens a lot over here too, with the puppy mills over here, where obviously they don't want to bring people back to where they're breeding dogs, so they'll meet in third locations and stuff. But yeah, really important. You want to see their home environment. You want to see how they interact with the people too. Like at that sort of age in puppies, they should be all over everyone and full of excitement, making sure the dog, has got good energy levels, its eyes are nice and clear. Open its mouth, make sure its gums are nice and pink, make sure it's got all its baby teeth are in place. Sounds a bit yucky, but see if you can find any poos laying around. You want to make sure we've got a good solid poo. We don't want any dogs with diarrhea and stuff. And that sort of ticks a lot of boxes for them. And nails too, just make sure none of them have got any trouble with their nails and stuff. Make sure all the nails are in place, they haven't been torn out of those sort of things, with their claws.
Would you avoid buying from pet stores?
Personally, I would, only because I'm in a position where I'd be able to find a breeder or go to my rescue. I've got those other things, But if someone doesn't know anyone and there's a dog in the window and it's at the and again, and I'll get beaten up for saying this, but there's pet stores that get their dogs and source their dogs responsibly as well. It's not every pet store gets their dog from a puppy mill. So that's something that needs to be sort of out there as well. So. Again, it's you've just got to sort of do your homework and see what's going on. But ideally, I would avoid a pet store just for the reason that I want to see my dog in its home environment. And when you buy a pedigree dog, you're straight to the breeder's house, and you see the dogs in the houses. Usually the dogs are living in better conditions than what the people live in, and everything's clean, immaculate. You walk in, it smells like disinfectant, Some dog poops and there's 4 people trying to pick up the poop before it even sort of hits the ground, They're just so passionate about their dogs, and that's what we really want to see wherever we go.
I think in Malaysia, once again, the situation is very different, where if you're buying from a pet store, more than likely, they're being bred in an unsavoury environment.
Yeah.
I dare say.
And again, some of those sort of classic behavioural stuff, if you've got a dog that's constantly chasing his tail or a dog that's sitting in the corner, and where it's hard, a lot of people don't really know how a puppy should present. So I rock in the pet store and some dog's doing something, sitting in the corner on his back legs going like this, and I think, oh my God, that's so cute, that's so wonderful. Yeah, that's really not what I should be looking for. And that lack of knowledge, I suppose, feeds the ability for pet shops and stuff to sell these dogs. And look, if we're in Malaysia and we're hanging out and you said you wanted to go get a dog from a pet shop, and as we're talking, and then someone says, oh, look, pretty well all the dogs in pet shops come from sort of puppy mills. At that point, I say, no, look, let's go get one from somewhere else. That's the background behind. And again, different countries, different setups and where they go. And I suppose over here, even like pet shops, if we had a pet shop that was selling puppies, and I can't really think of one that even does it now over here. that would be still visited regularly by the council rangers, and they'd have to be, make sure that, there's some sort of, regulation that's covering what's going on.
A big issue too, I feel, buying from pet stores is you don't know really how young the pup was when they left the litter.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about this before, that if you remove the pup from its mum too early, it has a tendency to then start to display and develop, undesirable.
Oh, absolutely. The worst thing we can do is, and even over here, I've had this talk, extensively with breeders and stuff. We've got this sort of 8-week sort of rule where, somewhere around 8 weeks we'll start. So, I'd love to see it around 12 weeks because those developmental weeks with the dog, and I've heard, and again, see, I can't sit down with the dog and ask him questions. So everything I say about a dog, in all honesty, is a guess. Hopefully it's a very educated guess because of, my history and background and study and stuff. It's only a guess, So I'd like to, we see that, between sort of like, I think 5 and I think about 14 weeks is that sort of span where the dog will learn the most in its life sort of stuff, And the more they get from their parents where they learn that, good things happen when I'm calm, I can't jump up on you. They're rested with their mates and their little mates, and they're learning their hierarchy and they're learning the rules. That developmental stuff is great. So, yeah, look, I'd love to see them all left at 12 weeks over here.
When someone makes a decision to adopt instead of buying,
yep,
ideally they go to a shelter.
Yep.
It's very overwhelming at a shelter. You kind of want to take everyone home.
Yes.
What should people consider before they get there? What should they look for?
Look, I think a lot of it is have confidence in your shelter before you start. And a follow on from that is that you have confidence in the people you're dealing with there. So if they're telling you something, take it on board because they're the people that's been caring for that dog and looking for that dog. The trouble, I guess, when people come to a dog, it's almost like they want to buy a car. Like I want this colour, that interior, that size motor. I want something that's not going to wee in the house. Not going to, like it just doesn't work that way. You've got to put the work in. It's your dog. So I think a lot of people sort of, when they come in to get the dog, they're a little bit sort of unrealistic with their expectations. But look, you need to come there, have a look at staff, see what you're going to get. And I tell this to people all the time. This is probably one of the things where I get the bad rap for being sort of a bit too full on. But if someone's got a dog and they're going, and they're getting on, I really like this dog. I love this dog. This dog's really good. And then they'll look at a piece of paper. Oh, can I see this dog? And I say, no, look, you don't want to see this dog. And I'm not being a jerk. But the trouble is, if you see that dog, and then you see the next dog, and then you see the next dog, you're overwhelmed, and you go home with no dog. So I suppose my best bit of advice, if you see a dog and you like him, just take him and go. Because end up like, oh my God, I just don't know what to do. And it just becomes so emotional and so overwhelming. If you get a dog and it connects and you think it's the right dog, get the hell out of there before you get sucked in and lose focus.
How do I know this dog is the right dog for me?
It's interesting you say that, Shannon, and that's why I had a bit of a giggle when we started talking about this. If I was to buy a dog, and I put my hand up, I sort of buy pedigree dogs or a number of pedigree dogs that I breed them for showing and bits and pieces. And let's say I wanted, I don't know, a golden retriever or something, and I'd do all my research and I'd be, stalking the breeder and I'd be getting all the documentation sent out to me. So I'm a full bottle on the litter as such, And in my mind, I'll know whether I want a boy or a girl dog. Right? And I'll rock up to the house and I'll pull up out the front and I will send in Jackie, my missus, and my child, and they can pick the dog. I won't even go in and look at the dog. Because, again, back to those very early statements about where we look at nature and nurture, it has no bearing on what dog you get. That dog's going to end up a certain way when he comes to live in this environment.
Even if that dog is an adult dog coming from a different home?
Yeah, very much so. Look, he may have more traits and it may take more work, but what you'll find is that, your dog will be a victim of the environment, I guess. With adult dogs, obviously you'd probably be a little bit more cautious about, what behaviours they're displaying and bits and pieces and where they're going. But, very much, especially with puppies, And I've spent a fortune, to get pick of the litter, where I sat there for hours looking at this dog saying, yep, that's the best looking puppy. And we all meet at 12 months of age. I got the ugliest puppy, like from a show perspective. It's like, because they all develop and grow differently. So I really don't care. Like you get me the dog, bring it home, and we'll mould it and return it how we want it. The dog's ability to change and evolve is constant. This thing you can't teach an old dog new tricks is absolute crap. If we're a pack of dogs and, we've got our hierarchy and you're the boss and you pass away and someone else steps up, we're following him on the spot. We're living here and this is the den and we've got like 700 rules in this den and we run out of water, we move down the road to a new den. At that point, there's new rules. We start following new rules and new structures implemented. Dogs psychologically constantly evolve. But where we fall into the trap is, nothing, we keep doing the same thing as a dog owner. And nothing changes, and we blame the dog. Well, you can't teach an old dog, but I'm doing the same shit. And I expect a different outcome. And that's, just crazy.
The definition of insanity.
It sure is.
A huge part of running a shelter is the spaying and neutering programs that we do.
Yep.
Not just for our residents, but going into the community, catch, neuter, and release.
Yep.
What's your opinion on spaying and neutering?
Oh, sensation. It's got to be done. The health benefits, even, with a male dog, especially medium-sized up. Our biggest, some of our biggest problems we have with male dogs is testicular and prostate cancers. So we get them fixed up, we alleviate them straight away. And the other thing too, with dogs, especially male dogs, it's not like I'm having sex with them, want to have sex. It's because something 3 kilometres away smells good, and I have to have sex with it. So dogs roaming, getting hit by cars, trying to get to these situations, that's all been created because the dog's intact. So once I, castrate a male dog, it's really beneficial. And there's even some good stuff now with chemical castration going through where, you can put a chip in the back of your dog's neck and, I think they do, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years sort of periods where it fits in the back and basically it shrinks the testicles of the dog and they've got no sex drive, So, as short-term options when you're trying to work out what you do, they're a great option. But as far as trying to control the number of street dogs we've got or unwanted population, neutering's got to be our first step of call, without a doubt.
I've noticed a lot of male owners see their male dogs, as a reflection of themselves, and they, for some reason, they feel emasculated if the dog were to be castrated, and they have quite a negative opinion about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Suddenly, this dog's gonna become weak or not himself. What have you noticed in your experience once a dog gets neutered?
Look, in all honesty, it's not as... A lot of the behavioural stuff is through circumstances. There's all these stats that come out and say, look, we fix up a male dog, there's about a 20% improvement in behaviour. And that would come from the reduction in testosterone, technically energy, reactivity, all that sort of, behaviours that testosterone fuels, I guess, they go straight away. But by getting a dog fixed up, it's not magically going to fix up every behavioural issue. There's a bit of a window period. It's probably about, 4 or 5 weeks after we've had the dog fixed up where those levels of testosterone drop dramatically. And that's a really good time for us to start sort of behavioural modification because the dog just won't be as challenging. So that definitely works. One of the interesting things that's never talked about is the almost detrimental effect of fixing up female dogs behaviourally. Obviously, as far as, problems with cysts and all those sort of things, it's a great job, and unwanted pregnancies and, all the other issues, prolapse, all the things that can happen, so we get them fixed up, that's great. When we fix up a female dog, there is an opportunity for the dog to transgress or get worse behaviourally. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. And that's because of the reduction of estrogen, yes, which is that caring, nurturing, maternal voice, it's the loving. And look, I get a lot of clients that might have a dog, female dog, that hasn't been the best dog, but it's bearable, manageable, and we get it fixed up, and it just ticks her over there. This means she's resource guarded and becoming reactive. Weeing in the house is a big one with female dogs, but it's nothing to do with I need to have a wee. It's all about scent marking, which is part of that dominant behaviour that happens. So, it's really important that we're aware that as a dog owner, if I've got a female dog and I'm going to get it fixed up, there may be a few more challenging things to come up. So maybe I just need to step up that little bit more just to compensate for her, what she's going through emotionally.
From a medical perspective, we want to wait long enough so that it doesn't alter the hormones too much,
yep,
and stunt the dog's physical development.
Yep.
from a training perspective, is there an ideal age for neutering a male or a female?
Not as much. Look, you're training, your dog's already done 8 weeks of intensive training with its mum, and then we continued. And look, I've had, and as you know, like some of my dogs have got a show, and they've got to be intact to show. Rottweilers and things like that. Look, I've had male Rottweiler intact, a standard poodle intact, both living together, happily running around. So it's not that they're going to fight and kill. It's more about me being in charge, and no one needs to fight. But it's interesting you say that, because over here, and again with the breeding and stuff, and some of the breeds, like French bulldogs and stuff, especially over in Queensland, over the other side of Australia, someone over here will buy a French bulldog at 10 weeks of age, and he comes over, or her comes over, and they're already fixed up.
Yeah.
So, I agree exactly what you said, where we want to get that played through, where we get the physical development with, the hormones in there to get where they are. But, I'm surprised that they're allowed to do this young in dogs. And there's definitely something to do. And this is about the breeder controlling his bloodlines and not wanting you to breed his dog, so it's fixed up well before it leaves my kennels. But
would you say a minimum of a year? Would you say after the first heat for a female dog? What would you add?
Look, I'd like to think that we let them get their first heat out with the girl. Boy dog's probably 12 months of age where they go. You've got growth plates in legs and these sort of things. We'd like to give them the best opportunity they can. Look, there's obviously, when we start looking for any sort of medical or health information and stuff, there's always the ability for the statistics to be corrupted, I guess, to benefit whoever makes the money out of it. So, it's interesting, it's all about fixing up dogs. And lately there's been a few studies done where dogs have been allowed to stay intact as they got later in life. Things like bone density and these things have stayed a lot better because they've been intact. So, yeah, I guess the jury's out, but, it's definitely an option on where we go. But, I think, especially boy dogs, going back to that guy, and I have a lot of male clients, and I don't want to get fixed up. I don't want him to sit down to week. I don't want, this sort of shit comes into it. But if he's cocking his leg, he's still going to cock his leg if he chop his balls off, because it's a behavioural thing. But, and then I go down the line, hey, bro, he's a pretty big dog. You realise if he's going to get sick or die early, it's probably going to be through his prostate or testicular cancer. If we get them cut off, we alleviate that. So there's ways we can approach it.
Paul, is there such a thing as bad breeds?
Bad breeds?
Yes. I know it's very popular to say there's no bad breeds, just for bad owners.
Yep.
But if we look at, once again, what's realistic, what happens with so many dogs that are rehomed, you just notice the same sort of breed mixes come through, and then if the council deems a dog as aggressive, they tend to be a mixture, once again, of the same types of breeds. Yeah. Can we say there's no such thing as bad breeds, or does the cliche come from a real place?
Look, I think there's bad breeds, but I think it's more about through breeding ethics where we've gone through. And not bad breeders, and I love the dogs, but I think there's been some terrible owners that have done some terrible things to dogs. We look at things like Shar-Peis, where they were overbred with the wrinkles, and they end up with skin infections. And, over here they brought in with the governing body, there was a reduction in how many wrinkles they had, trying to fix up the breed a bit, stop with the infections and stuff. And now we end up with Frenchies or Bostons and some of these sort of things that can't even reproduce naturally or can't give birth because their hips are too small for the size of the head. They're bad breeds. The small noses, where I've got to buy a dog and then spend another $8,000 so I can breed. They're all bad breeds. It was interesting. We did this thing, years ago. It was BSL, this breed-specific legislation, where they tried to outlaw, dogs and stuff. And we've got a list over here in West Australia where there's restricted breeds that you can't have, which are bad breeds. And again, you find that it's not as much the breed; it's the sort of meathead that gets it. And Rottweilers, we're allowed to have them over here at the moment, and we're allowed to have them as dogs. When I go back as a kid, and I'll go back a number of years, there was a number of Rottweilers that were involved in incidents, where they're hurting people and stuff. And Rottweilers were on the verge of being banned in West Australia. They were on the cusp of being banned.
And they're beautiful.
Absolutely. And all of a sudden, the one thing that saved the Rottweiler was the pit bull. because all of a sudden pit bulls popped up.
They were public enemy number one.
But more importantly, every dickhead, gangster, half-sucked, deal bag, drug dealing goose that wants to be tough, instead of getting a Rottweiler, got a pit bull. And all these pit bulls turned into dicks and started getting themselves in trouble because all the dickheads got pit bulls instead of Rottweilers. So the Rottweiler was saved by the pit bulls. And it's not as much the dog, it's the type of people that are attracted to us. And what you find, if you were to go through the stats, it's interesting, like I always have a bit of a laugh. The dog that bit me the most is Japanese Spitz. Any dog
pretty fluffy, smiley.
Yeah, smiling fingers are taken off my hand.
Yeah.
I've been bitten more by Japanese Spitz than the other dogs. But what you find, it's the type of people that get these dogs. And the guy that gets, the Rottweiler or the German Shepherd or the Cane Corso, or all these sort of, pit bulls with cropped ears and these sorts of things. There's some guy that wants to, try to be some gangster sort of thing, because they're dicks, their dogs end up dicks. So, it's really hard. And like I said, at the start, I've had dogs where 1 litter, the dog is the biggest sook in the world, and that's the family environment. The other side, he's a working dog doing security, and he's a serial killer. Same mum, same dad. So, if we get that variation in the same litter, with breeds, it's all about who gets them.
We have the luxury of being a no-kill shelter. I use the word luxury.
Yeah.
Because we are able to, I founded it personally.
Yeah.
I'm not attached to any council.
Yeah.
I'm not obligated to take dogs in.
Yeah.
And we walk a very fine line between having too many dogs and wanting to do as much as we can within the community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, because I'm able to look at the population control and say, yes, we'll take this one, or no, we can't, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I can keep dogs on ongoingly until the end of their natural lives, whether they're aggressive, whether they're rehomable, whether they have physical deformities, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, not every shelter has that luxury because they're tied to councils, or people will continually dump animals at their doorstep, and things get way out of control. So euthanasia is a necessity to control those sorts of environments. Now, I understand a very difficult part, I imagine it's very difficult, what you do is that when you work with certain rescues, you have to give a recommendation as to whether a dog is rehomable or if it isn't.
Yeah.
And with certain rescues that if you say, no, it isn't, what's going to happen to that dog. How do you deal with that? And does it still affect you after?
Look, absolutely. Yeah. Look, we just talk about no-kill shelters, look, I think it's great. I think, and it's great, and it's really good. And unfortunately, animal rescue and dog rescue it's in crisis. It's panic, So, we can't make a lot of decisions or put things in place to, enable us to do what we want to do. We have to do what we have to do. And look, I've had this discussion a number of times on no-kill shelters, and I'm going to take you out of the picture because you're my mate. Let's pretend I've got a no-kill shelter, and I've got it in an environment, and I've got a large population of dogs that need rehoming, or street dogs or whatever that need services similar to mine. And in my no-kill shelter, I've got 10 kennels, and eventually I'm going to end up at the point where a majority of those kennels are filled with dogs that I can't rehome. Now, I keep those 10 dogs, but because of my philosophy and what I'm doing with those 10 dogs, 100 dogs on the street get put to sleep because they couldn't come through my facility. Whereas if I would have kept it ticking over, is that a better way of doing things? And that's not up to me to decide, but it's, look, I love every shelter in the world should be a no-kill shelter. But unfortunately, we haven't got those things. And while I love no-kill shelters, I love their philosophy, unfortunately, what they do is they put more pressure on other shelters that they've got to make those hard calls because we take every one that goes in. But, the problem is with sort of, the dogs coming in, and especially with rescue dogs, and in my situation where there's going to be a dog that comes up for an assessment, very, very rarely will I say, this dog, really shouldn't go out to be rehomed, I'm a big believer, most dogs we can rehome. The trouble is trying to find the right environment. This dog can go, but, I wouldn't put it with kids. It can't be with another dog. It can't be with any other animals. Really can't go for walks unless you go out at midnight. And if you take it for a walk, I'd probably put it on a muzzle, yeah, this dog can live, but not many people go put their hand up for that,
Sure.
So it sort of limits on where they go. But, I'm very conscious, especially being this for so long over here. And if someone has a good experience, they tell everyone. If someone has, or they tell two people. Someone has a bad experience, they stand up and tell everyone. So, I'm also conscious where if someone gets a rescue dog and it goes pear-shaped, ends up biting one or goes terribly wrong or nips their kid or something, they're going to tell everyone I wouldn't rescue a dog. Rescue dogs have all got problems, and as a result of that one dog's actions, realistically, there might be 150 dogs that don't get home because of this guy. So we've also got to look at the big picture, I guess, and that's probably one of the, we don't have a national strategy on how to manage dogs, and we've talked about this all the way through this interview, whether it's the neutering program or adoptions and homes and stuff. But we just need to have something that sort of works out how we manage something this big. And, I have, I question all the time. And if we have a dog that is going to be, in an environment where he's in a kennel and maybe gets out for a bit of a run, but, even the people looking after him are sliding food under the door because they can't get in.
That's not a life mate.
Absolutely. Yeah. Where do we get to then? And, it's just difficult. And, and I say this all the time, even to the most pro, no-kill shelters, buddy, we can't save them all. And you've got to remember, this isn't my problem. This isn't your problem. You haven't got two dogs in the backyard spitting out puppies left, right, and centre. You picked up some other arseholes' problems. Same with me. I didn't create any of this shit. We're just trying to manage it. So I think it's very important we're realistic on what we can achieve. And yeah, it sucks. If I've got to make this call where, fuck it, this probably isn't going to work out. I'm sitting in the car, I'm in tears sometimes. I don't want to be, ain't going to make it, And it's not through his fault. It's because the dickheads before him sort of, buggered it all up. But someone's got to wear that. And I think it's really important for all of us, that we talk about that and support each other. Yes. Because, like I said, it's the ultimate, we're picking up other people's shit, and it's emotionally involved. And then what makes it worse is we get judged for how we do our business. We get judged by the public. Even worse, we get judged by other rescues. It's almost like, each rescue just wants to one-up each other and bag each other. We're very fortunate over here. I've got 2 or 3 rescues that sort of work with my rescue and work with our rescue, and we're very close and we work together, and they're a great bunch of guys. But, there's for those 3, there's like 300 that'll bag us. And it's just ridiculous. We're all trying to. There's no rules for this. No one, no one knows what's best practice. We're just trying to deal with the problem we've inherited, and it sucks.
I absolutely can empathise with what you're saying, because we face the same situation where people will visit our centre and they'll be over the moon with how the dogs are looked after. They're like, I've never seen a shelter look this clean, and all the dogs are really happy and stimulated, and they've got such good lives. But could you take 10 more?
Yeah.
Could you take? And then when we say no, they get really upset over it.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, if you don't want us to end up like all these other shelters where it's overcrowded, it's dirty, we're understaffed, we've got to worry about where the next meal is going to come from, or we have to decline medical treatment for a dog because we just can't afford it, then sure, bring us 10, bring us 20. Yeah. But there has to be a stop policy if you want us to continue to maintain the quality that we have.
Absolutely. And that's one of the problems with rescues in general, whether it's someone foster caring or whatever, is that, and I see this a lot, where quite often, they can't say no, because the emotional, oh, well, look, if you don't take him, we'll put him down, all right, I'll take him. Next minute, someone's got 27 houses in their dogs in their house. They've got, their dog shit all over the floor. It's just like a tip. And they end up almost like a hoarder, because the pressure that's been put on them to do this. And again, it's not their problem, It's a difficult area. And like I said, to some place like you where, at least over here in Australia and the Western world, dogs have got a very positive relationship within society, and you don't have that, So my ability to get resources or funds or assistance is going to be so much more or easier to access than someone like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, I couldn't even imagine it out there where, the community, the society, the legislation, everything is just sort of doesn't support what you're trying to achieve. We're over here, and I walk in and someone say, look, I run a dog rescue, and everyone bends over backwards for you. Over there, you walk in and say, I run a dog rescue, they're going to kick you up the bum and throw you out. I think you're a weirdo.
Yeah.
So,
why are you wasting your life doing
yeah, what are you doing that for? They're only verbs. I can't get over that. Yeah.
Now, Cesar Millan is famous for the phrase exercise, discipline, affection.
Yep, he's all that stuff, yep.
That's the hierarchy.
Yep.
Do you agree?
Absolutely.
In Malaysia, it's quite challenging to exercise your dog. In Australia, it's super easy. Lots of dog-friendly parks, beaches.
Yeah.
Quite restricted to those spaces in Malaysia. Sometimes you'll walk a dog and the neighbours give you funny looks because of that stigma.
Yep.
What advice can you give for owners living in that environment to provide their dogs with adequate exercise and stimulation?
Look, the first, good question. It's a really good question because I honestly believe dogs don't need as much exercise as we think they need, is the first thing. And I think that's even more so now because a lot of owners get anxiety and energy mixed up. If your dog doesn't suffer from anxiety, it doesn't really need a lot of exercise. But what we find is we try to manage anxiety with exercise. So I'm walking the dog for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, an hour at lunchtime. He's still off his head because I'm not winning anything. What you find with dogs with energy, it's not like you. Like you'll go to the gym and you'll smash it. Like you'll run yourself in the ground, you'll train crazy, for 2 hours because next door Subway or at home I've got a protein. Like you've got that replenishment. Dogs don't have that ability, So energy is something that's almost guarded by dogs. They sort of manage that resource very carefully because they don't know where the next food or drink's coming from. So, they're not as – obviously there's certain dog breeds that have higher levels of energy than others. But even when we look at those dogs, and the exercise, it's a good opportunity for us to reinforce positive behaviour. To me, I find more value in the walk in being my opportunity to reinforce I'm in charge. Where you'll stay behind me, don't worry about sniffing, don't worry about peeing, everything that's coming towards you, you just chill, bro, I've got this, you don't need to get involved. It's a good opportunity to reinforce my pack structure through walking. And then I see the second benefit of that is actually exercise, So, people come home and I've got to take my dog for a walk, they get bent out of shape. You've got to get them out, got to do bits and pieces, but it's not as important as what we need,
So I can achieve what I want to achieve over a 20-minute walk?
10-minute walk. Just get them out, stretch them all around and stuff. Go through. It's interesting, and again, you would have been in Malaysia where you see your dogs as you're living on the street and those sort of things. If they're not out looking for food or coming back, they don't put their tracksuit pants on and go outside and start doing some chin-ups on the sign and start running laps just for fun.
Yeah,
everything chills. Again, and that's where to me, for yourself and those sort of things, that was the best learning ground for me about dogs was going to study these big street dog populations, in Bali or, Thailand, Central America, and they all behave exactly the same. And, it just gives you that different perspective and a really good understanding of what is, normal dog behaviour that hasn't been corrupted by people. And I use that term corrupted very specifically.
I want to finish up on more about complete canine solutions.
Yeah.
You spoke before about that you focus more on, instead of the puppy training side of things, on behavioural modification.
Yeah.
But when you first started, you did want to address those issues in young dogs.
Yeah.
What's your view on puppy training group classes?
Look, I guess the puppy group class thing, I guess, is primarily directed at socialisation, which is one of the things that we really misunderstand, I guess, and don't really, comprehend correctly. I would go to so many clients' houses and I can't see their fridge. My dog's done puppy school, grade 1, this, that, every certificate under the sun that is done at this local vet or local sort of shelter or area or something, yet they can't take it out the front, it's going to kill everyone. So socialisation isn't about getting my dog to be mates with other dogs. Socialisation is about your dog being exposed to certain stimuli and ensuring it responds appropriately. And the best way to achieve that is to have a good relationship with us. If my dog, when we go to the front door, isn't fearful, or isn't reactive, that's because that's my job and they have their confidence in me. So, and when we use socialisation, so we use it as it's not about, people's view is we take the dog out and we show stuff to the dog, and get the dog used to it. My mentality is we go out and the dog's exposed to situations, but the dog feels confident because of me, and it gets an increased level of support from me and feels that I'm not going to do anything bad with them. So it's about building the relationship with me is what socialisation is about, not about exposing the dog to the stimuli, if that makes sense. And that's where it works. And it's quite interesting. There'll be something like, you'll get a fireworks warning come over on Facebook and everything. I'll lock up your dogs, there's fireworks on tonight, And I'm running down the road with my clowns trying to find the fireworks so that I can get them under there as much stimulation as I can for that high level of stuff. So, socialisation is very easy if your dog trusts you and looks to you for direction. And, puppy schools, great to get out there, do all those sort of things, but it's not going to be doing 4 Sundays in a row with your 8-week-old puppy is not going to make this dog sensationally balanced when it faces all situations from his life. It's an ongoing thing. And it's a fluid thing too. It's that, pack structures changes, relationship changes. We need to constantly work on being a good role model and a good leader.
Do you feel the same about doggy boot camps?
Oh, here's a good one. I don't understand how they work, I've got to be honest. And look, we've got a pretty good brand name over here, and I really hope that no one in Perth watches these videos. And
There'll be 3 people.
3, yeah. You, me, and my daughter. I try to make it a rule not to bag other companies and other businesses because I don't need to. I don't need to shit out. With the philosophy of a boot camp, I guess, I find it flawed where, your dog's behaviours are a direct result of what happens with you in this pack environment. To remove the dog off site and get him to work with someone else in a neutral environment, of course he's going to present well. But if he comes back to your house and you do the exact same stuff you were doing before he left, it's going to be the same stuff. So I just think, again, it's a little bit flawed in its perception. If you're going to take someone off site and train him, it should be the owner. Take the owner off for a week and get him to live and see what you do with your dogs and how you build your structure and teach him how to build that good relationship with his dog. Don't take the dog.
And that's why you do one-on-one training in people's homes.
Absolutely. I want to see how the dog presents when I arrive. Straight away I can tell whether it's the dog's house or the person's house. See if the dog resource guards the owner. Straight away see what their pack structure is. And you can pick it up within, even before you get to the door, listening on how the dog barks when he hears you pull up tells you so much, whether he's anxious, whether he's, on guard, whether he's protecting his house. Before you even get to the door, you can tell what's happening just by the way the dog barks.
Are there certain things that you prioritise in a session? Do you give obedience training or is it primarily behaviour modification?
They're both hand in hand. Behaviour modifications will result in all your sit, stay, drops, all that sort of stuff will come with behaviour.
So you do that initially?
It all fits in.
Okay.
Look, it's very difficult, Sharon, because I get to people and it's almost not structured because every person I rock up, every house, the person and the dog have got a different relationship. And the person's abilities are different too. Like sometimes I'll get into a conversation, that's a lot higher level and we'll be talking about, why people's relationships with dogs have changed so much, over history. Whereas sometimes you're sort of stuck at that really bottom sort of step stuff, trying to get the message across. So with your consultation, it's really about your ability to get your information over to the person and how they take it on board and then where we move to. But, the number one thing that I sort of prioritise with everything is like, this isn't about me training your dog. I can't fix your dog. You've got to do that. What I intend to do is give you the ability to communicate effectively with your dog because that's what's breaking down, that inability to communicate. And what you don't realise is everything that is driving you crazy, you're actually creating that situation by rewarding the wrong behaviours. And that's where we sort of go from. It's our starting point.
How difficult is it to instill in owners this calm, confident leadership? Do you sometimes shake your head when you've left the owners and like, I just don't think they can carry out the training?
Walk out and think that is the worst money they've ever spent in their life is not going to change. Absolutely. And look, again, there's the ability of the owner is one thing, and where they go to and stuff. And the other thing too is the emotional connection with the dog. If I need this dog to be my baby and I'm going to continually carry it around and dress it, and that person, rightly or wrongly, because it's not up to me to judge, needs that dog as an emotional support more than a pet, I can't win that argument. If you're not prepared to let me teach you how to manage a dog, I can't help you, and I get that. And, the way society has got over here and has become more and more isolated, and that's where the fur baby come from. It's the breakdown of the family unit is where fur babies come from. And that, people living by themselves or people in FIFO relationships or, people not having children. This is that breakdown in that social structure and that increased level of isolation is where the fur baby come from. Now, if people need that to feel whole, that's on, I respect that. But the behavioural issues are because of those things, and I can't fix that then. So that's one of those things we face all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you genuinely want to improve the quality of life of your dog and ultimately that improves your relationship with the dog, we can work on all those things.
Seeing as a lot of our viewers are overseas, do you offer online consults?
Yes, we do online consults. Yeah, we do. It's something we don't do a lot of, but yeah, we've done it, especially with COVID. It's one of those things we had to do. So, yeah, we're able to do that sort of things.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
And,
what should someone expect in a consult with yourself?
Look, a lot of it is just about understanding the psychology of the animal. Obviously, in a consult online or those sort of things, we can't do a lot of the practical stuff. But a lot of the stuff that explains why behaviours are going on, tell me why it's happening, it's impossible to fix anything unless we know why it's occurring. And what we normally try to do is we fix the wrong thing. Like I'll go and buy this special halter that connects to a harness that goes to around 2 legs and wraps around his tail 3 times to stop him pulling on the leash, when I go for a walk, but it's not the walk's the problem, it's the other thing. So it's about understanding, what's creating a situation and we can start dealing with it. So, those sort of things we work on.
It's very easy to know or to tell how you give to dogs and the ways that you enhance their lives. How have dogs enhanced your life?
Oh, look, it gives that sense of belonging, without a doubt, and structure. I'm pretty sort of, always busy trying to do things, one idea to the next sort of stuff, and just having that grounding, having that responsibility, especially prior to having my daughter, it was that, that responsibility. Like I like responsibility, and having a dog and providing for them and ensuring, it's a good check that you don't get selfish too, because every decision you make in life, how's this going to impact on my dogs? Is it going to be in their best interest as well as mine? Is it going to compromise them? And I just think it's a good grounding for everyone to have a dog. And, you often hear people, like, oh, yeah, dogs are man's best friend, Yeah, they might be our best friend, but they're our oldest friend. They're the first animals ever domesticated. And as you know, as we get older in life, those old friendships are the ones that really count, and that's what dogs are to people. So to have that ability to sort of, spend time with them and, it breaks your heart when they pass.
Yeah.
What do you do? They're great. I couldn't imagine life without dogs.
Same.
And, it's just, I had a T-shirt once that if your child doesn't want to pat my dog, he's going to grow up to be a serial killer. So you should get them printed for the rest of the
I'm sure they'd sell
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, I only got 10%.
Yeah. Look, it's been a very enlightening conversation. I really appreciate all your information, your expertise. If someone wants to book in with you, what's the best way?
Private message on Facebook. Our Facebook page is probably our best way to sort of contact us, especially when we're around.
Mm-hmm. We're going to put links to the website too.
Yep, and we'll sort all that out for you.
Yeah.
And we'll share this on our page and thing. And just before I go, and I know this has been about me and everything else, it'd be real injustice not to acknowledge what you do. with your rescue.
Oh, thanks.
And like I said, you know, I don't get why you've done it. You know, it would have been less painful to stab yourself in the eye with a knitting needle to, you know, set up a rescue in such a, I guess, an environment that just doesn't support what you're trying to achieve. Like I said, you know, and people in the Western world have got no idea. And, you know, you've given up your family over here, your life, you shoot over here, your work job's over here to take the money and go back. A lot of people wouldn't have a clue of what you've done and the passion you've got. And that really needs to be acknowledged. Congratulations.
Mate, I appreciate it.
No,
I love you, brother.
You too.
Thank you so
Cheers,
much.
mate.
Thanks for watching, everybody. See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Bye-bye.